Who was Claude Mone? By and Waldron. Who was Claude Mone? Claude Mone brought sunshine into painting. He was one of the first artists to work outdoors. That may not sound unusual to us. But before 1870, most artists did all their painting in studios. They used models dressed up as Greek gods or heroes from history. They painted with dark colors so their pictures would look more serious. They might have sometimes gone outside to draw a scene, but they always came back inside to paint the finished picture. Claude Mone and his artist friends broke the rules. Even as art students in Paris, they took their easels and paints and brushes outdoors to paint riverbanks or woods. They made trips to the seashore and painted all day long. They wanted to show the way sunlight made water and trees and boats look at different times during the day. If they painted people, they painted ordinary people in ordinary clothes. They used bright colors and painted quickly. For years, Monet earned hardly any money. Sometimes he could not pay the rent, sometimes his family had no heat, sometimes they went hungry. Still, Monet would not give up. Today, he is one of the most famous artists ever. Paintings by Monet sell for millions of dollars and hang in museums all over the world. We are all lucky that Claude never stopped believing in his art. Chapter 1: A Boy Who Loved Drawing. The artist Claude Monet was born in Paris, France, on November 14, 1840. But when he was 5, his family moved to Le Havre, a great seaport. As a boy, Claude hated school. His school was open only 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the afternoon. Still, he could barely stand it. School always made him feel like he was in a prison. When the sun was shining, he wanted to be outdoors, in the fields, or by the sea. Throughout his life he was a person who never wanted to stick by the rules. Claude's father was a grocer. He sold supplies to the captains of the tall ships in the harbor. Claude loved to go down to the docks. He liked to watch the men unload cargo from ships. There was mahogany from South America, sugar from the West Indies, coffee beans from Java, tea from India, and dates from Persia. He liked to hear the men speaking foreign languages. Claude's mother died when he was 16. His Aunt Marie-Jeanne had no children of her own, so she helped to raise him. He was a tall, cheerful boy. He always liked to draw. He began drawing pictures of imaginary animals and funny pictures of his teachers. Claude also took drawing classes. His teacher taught the way everybody taught art then. Students first drew pictures of statues. After years of this, the students were allowed to draw living people. If they took classes long enough, the students would learn to paint. Claude did not like the teacher or the class. He kept on with his own drawing, using a pencil or pen and ink to turn out quick sketches of people in Le Havre, a store that sold art supplies framed his drawings and put them in the window. Claude sold many of his pictures. The store owner introduced him to a local painter. His name was Eugene Boudin. He liked to paint landscapes, pictures of nature. Boudin invited Claude to spend the day painting with him. Claude said no at first. Boudin's little pictures sold for far less money than Claude's cartoons. Then one summer day, he gave in and bought some oil paints. Then he set out with Boudin for the country. Oil paints. When Monet was young, large paintings of historical scenes or myths were very popular. It might take an artist weeks, months, or even a year to complete a painting. Artists used sharp outlines for everything, nothing was soft or blurred, they worked toward an absolutely perfect finish. This required at least 3 coats of paint. Until just before Monet began painting, French artists were still using the same kinds of oil paints that artists had used for 400 years. They had to grind their own pigments and mix their own paints. They used many earth-toned colors. There was no way to make good, bright, green paint. By the mid-19th century, new dyes for paints came along. Artists had new and brighter colors to use. About the same time, manufacturers figured out how to put oil paints in tubes with screw tops. Now artists could take their paints outdoors. Just in time for the Impressionists. Boudin was one of a handful of artists who painted outdoors. When Claude watched his new friend painting the sky and the fields exactly as they were, his eyes opened. Claude's life changed. He wanted to go to Paris to study painting. His father wanted him to go into the grocery business. But his aunt encouraged Claude. She, too, was a painter. In 1859, he left Le Havre for Paris. Claude was 18 years old. The money from his funny pictures was more than enough to support him. Paris was a dazzling city with cafes, nightclubs, and museums. Claude went to see the great art show known as the Salon. It was held every year in a giant glass-roofed hall. Every artist wanted his paintings to be in the Salon. Claude saw more than 2,000 pictures. They hung from floor to ceiling with their frames touching. All the paintings were the type that showed famous moments in history or myths. This type of art didn't interest Claude at all. He thought it looked depressing. He enrolled in classes at the Académie Suisse, which was free. Students contributed a little money to pay for a model and worked on whatever they wanted to. They could draw or paint with oils or watercolors. They could paint a live model or they could work on a still life. They could come any time from early in the morning until late at night. For Claude it was like being heaven. Claude worked on his drawing. He made friends with an older student named Camille Pissarro. The two remained friends all their lives. Monet loved living in Paris. But in 1861, this exciting time came to an end. Why? Claude Monet had to join the French army. Chapter 2, A Rocky Start. Monet was sent to Algeria in northern Africa. He loved the heat and the light. He thought it was romantic to sleep in a tent in the desert. Zouaves. The Zouaves was the military unit that Monet joined in 1861. The first regiments were made of men from the Zou region of Algeria. Later on, Frenchmen like Claude Monet were enlisted as well. The Zouaves helped France conquer Algeria and fought for France in wars outside Africa. They played an important role in World War I. Zouaves wore dashing uniforms with full red or white trousers tucked into shiny black boots that came up almost to the knee. They wore a wide sash across their chest and a long coat with a gold braid. A small cap topped off the outfit. Men were supposed to serve in the French for 7 years. But after 2 years, Monet caught typhoid fever and was sent home on sick leave. That summer, in Le Havre, Monet continued to paint outdoors. He met a Dutch artist Johann Barthold Jonkind who, like Boudin, painted outdoors. Jonkind and Boudin were his schoolmasters, Monet said later. Monet's aunt thought that his finished paintings looked like rough sketches. But she saw how hard Claude worked. So she paid the government to let Claude out of the army for good. Then she packed him off to Paris. His father promised him an allowance if he studied with a proper art teacher. So Monet tried more art classes. Monet's new teacher thought that he was a very good artist. However, he wanted Claude to make the models better looking than they really were. If their feet were too big, he thought Claude should make them smaller. Monet did not agree. Not at all. He thought you should paint what you saw. Nor did he like painting inside a crowded, noisy studio. But something wonderful came out of these classes. 3 of the students, Pierre-Auguste Renoir, Alfred Sisley, and Frédéric Bazille, became close friends of Claude's. For years, they all worked together. Bazille was a medical student. His parents paid for his art classes as long as he kept up with medical school. Renoir had started work as a china painter when he was only 13. Like Monet, he had saved enough money to come to Paris. Sisley was the lucky one, they all said. He was English. His father was a businessman in Paris and paid for his son's art studies without conditions. Monet's friends. Monet became close friends with Frédéric Bazille, Pierre-Auguste Renoir, and Alfred Sisley while studying at Charles Glaire's art studio in 1862. Bazille was born in Montpellier, France, in 1841 to a wealthy family. He often painted outdoors with Monet, but his paintings were more traditional. When the Franco-Prussian War broke out in 1870, Bazille joined the Zhou army. He was killed in action that same year. Renoir was born in Limoges, France, in 1841. He was the son of a working-class tailor. Renoir loved painting and created many lively portraits and scenes of social life. He had a long and successful career. He died in 1919. Sisley was born in Paris, France, in 1839 to English parents. While Monet and Renoir often painted urban life or social scenes, the natural landscape was the central focus of Sisley's artwork. He died in 1899. Although not as famous as either Monet or Renoir, Bazille and Sisley have paintings in many famous museums in the United States and Europe. Monet told his new friends about painting outdoors. At first the others weren't interested. Renoir persuaded Monet to go with him to copy pictures at the Louvre Museum. But instead Monet set up his easel inside the museum and painted what he saw outside the window. Photography. Photographs were shown in the Paris Salon for the first time in 1859. This was a year before Monet first visited the Salon. The new art of photography influenced young painters of the day. Photographs showed everyday life, ordinary people in modern clothes. They captured a moment in time. This is what Monet wanted to do. Also, because photography provided a realistic picture of anything, artists like Monet and his friends felt that painters were now free to be less real. They could be subjective and explore the effects of light and color. Photographers often worked outdoors, carrying their huge cameras to the same places where Monet liked to paint. Often they set up their equipment beside the easels of artists. Finally, Monet convinced his new friends to visit a pretty little town near a huge forest. They packed up their easels, paint boxes, canvases, and brushes and headed out. His friends made sketches outdoors and then finished their paintings later at a studio. Monet, however, did all his work outdoors. Already he was trying to capture sunshine and the way light and shadows fell on trees and grass. In 1864, the art school closed. Monet never took another art class. He went home to Le Havre. His family was fed up. He hadn't sold a thing since the funny pictures he did as a schoolboy. He should start painting the proper way. Did Monet listen? Of course not. He went off to the seacoast and painted pictures outdoors. He sent 2 to the Salon in 1865. And both were accepted. He was thrilled. Newspapers praised his work. Claude sold both paintings for a nice sum of money. Happy with this success, he began a new huge picture. The canvas was 15 feet high and 20 feet long. Famous painters of the old school often painted their scenes from history on canvases that big. But Monet had something different in mind. He wanted to paint 12 people in everyday clothes at a picnic. He had friends come and pose for the picture. It was hard working outdoors on a canvas that big. So, unfortunately, Monet had to break his own rule and take the canvas inside to work on it. He much hoped to enter this new picture in the Salon, but he couldn't finish it in time. Instead, he quickly painted a life-size portrait of his beautiful new girlfriend, Camille. She had white skin and black hair. For the picture she wore a green striped dress and carried a parasol. Again, because of time, he did the painting in his studio. The woman in the green dress was accepted for the Salon in 1866 and was a triumph. Were Monet's father and aunt pleased? No. They were furious. They had found out that Monet and Camille were living together but were not married. Once again his father stopped his allowance. Claude was 25 years old and Camille was 19. They had no money, in fact, they owed money. They left Paris and rented a house in a small town. Monet started on another big picture, not as big as the picnic painting, but still big. It was 8 feet by 7 feet and showed 4 women among trees and flowers. Camille posed for all 4 women. Monet swore he would paint everything outdoors. He dug a trench in the garden so he could lower the canvas when he wanted to work on the top part. Another painter came by one day and asked why he wasn't working on the picture. "The sun's not shining," Monet said. His friends suggested that Monet could at least work on the background. But Monet explained that everything, even the background, had to be painted in sunlight. That was the whole point of his art. The Salon of 1867 turned down his big new picture, Women in the Garden. It was too different. The sunlight shining on the dresses and parasols and the shadows from the tree looked strange to the judges. Monet was almost out of his mind with despair. Nevertheless, he kept on painting. He had no money to buy canvases. Sometimes he scraped the paint off old paintings he'd done so he could paint new pictures. Basile felt sorry for Monet and bought Women in the Garden. He promised to send some of the money every month. But lots of times he forgot. Monet was desperate. Camille was going to have a baby. Sometimes there wasn't enough money for food. Monet was in a jam. He took Camille to Paris where he sold 2 pictures. He gave the money to Camille so that she had something to live on. Then Monet went back alone to Le Havre. He decided to pretend to his parents that he and Camille had broken up. Back in Le Havre he worked like crazy. Every bit of money he earned would go to Camille. He painted 20 pictures, people, landscapes, seascapes. More than anything, he hoped to afford to be with Camille when the baby came. But on August 8, 1867, little Jean was born without his father there. Finally, Monet's aunt took pity on him and gave him money for train fare to Paris. He and Camille and the baby lived in a small rented room. It was freezing cold that winter, and the family sometimes went without heat or enough food. Bad luck seemed to follow Monet everywhere. He sold no paintings. He and Camille and the baby moved to a cheaper place in the country.